The African Union condemned Israel's offensive in Gaza and called for its immediate end. Moussa Faki, the chair of the African Union Commission, said Israel's offensive was the most flagrant violation of international humanitarian law, accusing Israel of having exterminated Gaza's inhabitants. The AU also calls on African countries to cut diplomatic ties with Israel. Dr. Sam Amadi is here to look at this issue. Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you for coming to Newsnight.
Thank you.
Now, the African Union is now looking to Africa to garner support against Israel. Yet, you would agree with me that African countries have their own interests, aid, military support, and the like. So where do you see countries like Kenya, Ghana, Democratic Republic of Congo sitting on this table?
First, I think maybe a radical African position, maybe some would say precipitate and maybe unstrategic. First, I mean, there's some seeming global concern about the way Israel is conducting Gaza, the Gaza conflict. Essentially, I think where most of the world stand is that the current actions could be seen to be basically hitting innocent, especially children and women. And so there's a consensus that it has to stop. So the AU, weighing in and saying, maybe that action needs to stop, makes sense. But even the ICJ refused to accept, the ICC refused to accept, to call it genocidal. So in the context that the AU, the way the message is framed, looks like really blundering into the crisis and the current African state to cut ties. Again, no Arab country, the Arab Union has not cut diplomatic as a group because of this. They have very bad relationship with Israel. Some have people like Saudi Arabia says, look, the Abraham Covenant, they're not going to sign on. But there have been no such radical extreme response. And the question people ask is, what's Africa's commitment here? Whereas we are within the global community, so everybody takes action based or comments based on the obligation to protect and protection of human rights. But to call on states to cut off diplomatic ties because of Israel's war or attack on Gaza, when European countries that are leading, they lead in terms of investment in this conflict, in terms of benefit, are here to do so. Seems to remind us of Africa's blundering. I mean, look, Congo war, Sudan is going on seriously. People are dying every day. The AU has not really put on plan to deal with that. We've seen what's going on with ECOWAS and the way the Burkina Faso, the Sahel, is burning. ECOWAS has no noticeable footprint in dealing with those crises. So it reminds me of what Arthur Lewis, the first black Nobel economist, said in 1965 his book, The Politics of West Africa, and he made a key point. In the first war, world global disorder around communism, Marxism, Africa imported conflict for itself. We had Marxist revolutionaries, and the guy said, look, we have a problem that is different. We didn't have a developed class. Why are we carrying out Marxist revolution where you had issues of peasantry to deal with? So the key point here is African leaders have the tendency to import crisis that's not relevant to their own geopolitical concern. The Palestinian crisis is something that we should tag on with the world to condemn, to provide solution. It's not something that we should import and then mandate African countries to cut off diplomatic relations. When Europe, when America, UK, these are people who benefit and who have made investment in this conflict, have not taken those drastic actions. So it reminds me again on a path we like to tow, what I call unstrategic radicalism. It has no bearing on this continent is totally misgoverned. This continent is a scandal in poverty. Most of the countries sit on that table. None of them are viable countries in terms of social economy. most of them need help. They need to really focus, look at the crisis of development and governance in this continent.
Okay, you are saying that.
Yeah.
You are saying that we should mind our own business, which is poverty and development.
Calculated and strategic in engaging with world politics.
But this is not the first time African countries are taking the stand like this. Remember, 1973, the October War of 1973, the then OAU, Organization of African Unity, took a stand
the same style
against Israel.
And what do we get from that?
Yeah.
So that's the point.
Are we now? Are we likely to then tow the same path?
We're like, see, we have this ingrained failure to be authentic and to be indigenous. Look at our problem. Look at, for example, the way they destabilized Libya. So Africa has lacked that capacity to think African and focus on our problem and solve them, and then play strategically with the world. I mean, nobody's investing in the killings, the death going on in Sudan today. It doesn't even get mentioned when NATO or when the EU meets or when the UN meets. So the question then is, why? Look, the Palestinian crisis is a global crisis, and Africa even lacks, apart from South Africa who went to court. By the way, South Africa has historical affinity with the PLO. Palestinian Liberation Organization in the days of apartheid struggle. So South Africa has remained in that, if you like, warm, revolutionary struggle mode in spite of its growing crisis. So we can make a case for South Africa for leading. And South Africa took a much more sensible approach of leading through the ICC litigation. Of course, South Africa had already suspended diplomatic relations. But the notion that the AU would sit and say, hey guys, the language is totally radical, overboard. I mean, there's issues around humanitarian crisis in the country, but you can't just single out, the Israel's perspective and say Africa should cut off diplomatic relationship with Israel on account of the war. The two key issues is that first, what about the events that led to that? Second, what's really our skin in this game that should make countries like Nigeria, Ghana, other African countries decide as a bloc to cut diplomatic relations. So I read it as part of the continuing tradition of not being strategic in dealing with global events, of not looking inward and minding your business largely, even when you give 20% attention to. I mean, we're not a great power in any of this shaping up, even if the world is not even remarking.
Now, Dr. Amadi, even if all African countries take a stand against Israel, one country will not do that is Morocco, But then Algeria has been a leading critic of Israel in this war. So how then do you see African countries divided in taking a stand in this matter?
Each African country, this is not an issue that AU should mandate Africa to pull out. I mean, countries, you talk about Algeria, for example, they've been outspoken, but I'm not sure they have taken this radical move. Morocco may not even care about it. So there are different African countries that respond differently. But the point I'm making is that, look, there is a lot in this strategic battle. First is, look, the endless Israeli, the notion of two-state union, two-state solution. AU can restate it. Everybody agrees. That's the point I'm making. There are some clear, safe positions to take. One, stop the war in Gaza, because yes, there may be reason to defend yourself when October 7 happened with Hamas being a terrorist organization and hitting Israel. But now, there is real humanitarian crisis that this war is provoked. So we can say, stop the war now, ceasefire. We can say, let's get back to the two-state solution. But we shouldn't, in the language they use,
cut ties.
Axis of exterminating. I mean, this is here saying they're exterminating Palestinians. That's not true. That's factually contestable. And that shouldn't be what AU should be saying. Secondly, it's not right for AU to insist that countries like us who are facing that different issues should bother ourselves to the point of holistically cutting off. I mean, why should we cut off the diplomatic relationship with Israel when US has not done that, UK has not done that, Australia has not done that, Germany, even the countries where protests are going every day, in Europe, even in Arab world, they are still discussing, negotiating, trying to use diplomatic resources to get Israel off the war curve and get back to normalizing, or at least to pre-October 7 status quo. Why should the AU position end with a call that we should cut off the project? So I think it mirrors the crisis of attention. The AU should now Africa should come of age, as Nigerian Prime Minister said in 1965. Coming of age means minding your business, being strategic, not importing global crisis that you have no capacity, no bandwidth to even manage or solve. I mean, how will Nigeria really, Africa really contribute to solving the Palestinian crisis? Africa has more terrible things to deal with. There's a war of equal proportion going on in Sudan. There are killings, terrorism around the Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea. Nigeria is in Plateau here. We saw communities butchered. Where did AU really focus on addressing the crisis of development and crisis of governance in Africa? Why are they externalizing into crises they have no resources or capability or diplomatic competence actually to solve, rather drawing for us? First, is diversionary, it's a waste of time. Secondly, it gets into a conflict that you have no real gain. Palestine is not Africa, it's far-fetched. I see the sentiment. I mean, like I said, there's a tradition of AU dabbling into this crisis and then doing ex-cathedra proclamations and then, getting themselves tied into even what the West will walk away from. I mean, they are going to be more strategic, do the deals and get back to business. But we will be stuck at the bottom of the pyramid, struggling with the consequence of our unstrategic radicalism. That's really my concern.
Unstrategic radicalism. Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you very much for coming to Newsnight.